Welcome and welcome back. We're here for a review and reaction to episode 2 of WandaVision. It took me a while to get around to this one because apparently Disney Plus had crashed in between number 1 and number 2. It wouldn't let me start episode number 2 right away. Now, what happened in this episode was that there was a sound at the window at the beginning of the episode, which was written off as a tree branch, as Wanda and Vision were in bed together. And then the next morning, we learn that they have a magic act to do at the talent show, neighborhood talent show, something like that. But Vision, instead of sticking around for that, goes and tries to find the neighborhood watch team at the library. The neighborhood watch team, however, is just a group of guys that sit around spreading rumors about one another. And Wanda is ready for the talent show. Vision is late. At the library, Vision ate a piece of gum which gunked up his insides. Mayhem happens at the magic show with Vision not really being Vision. He's drunk off of the little bit of alcohol that's in the gum, but it's because his insides are gunked up. And we get Wanda saving the day as mayhem is happening. And at the end of that, there is someone who comes up in a bee costume, in a bee suit, not bee costume, that's different things, a beekeeper suit that emerges from the manhole in the middle of the street. I think what is going on is that Wanda has created a little world for herself. That is the world in which we are living and finding ourselves in this series. But what is really going on is that she is being commandeered, I think, by the neighbor lady and weaponized to some degree. At some point during the episode, Wanda goes outside and finds a helicopter in the bushes, a helicopter with the Iron Man colors. Everything that is red shows up in red on the screen. So the red and yellow of the helicopter are highlighted against the black and white episode. I think what's going on, like I said, is that Wanda is being commandeered by another witch, the neighbor lady, and weaponized to some degree, and it is the SHIELD agents that are trying to break into her mind as she is probably creating real-life mayhem in the real world, while she is occupying herself in her imaginary world, being sort of held onto in that imaginary world by the neighbor lady. You will notice from time to time, as the illusion is on the verge of being broken, as it was at the talent show, the neighbor witch lady was clutching her bag. She was afraid that things would go off the rails and Wanda would realize she was in someone else's dream. We mentioned Inception in the review to the first episode. I think that's what's going on here, is Wanda is in someone else's dream, but given all of the things that she wants, because like we see at the end of this episode, as the mantra for the neighborhood talent show was, it's for the children, Wanda ends up pregnant at the end of this episode. It is interesting to me, again, it seems that the architecture of this series has been changed in wake of The Mandalorian being 9 episodes. It seems, as this series was announced as a 6-episode series, but is now 9, that there will be different breaks in the episodes to reach that 9-episode mark. It would be very difficult, I think, for them to have in secrecy and in tune with events in the series, shot additional episodes. I think that instead what we will have is different edited episodes which are edited in different ways to end at different points. And that seems to be much more cohesively what could have happened with the first 2 episodes here. That first episode did not feel like an episode. It did feel like an old sitcom episode, very loosey-goosey, very short, very brief, and very throwaway. There was nothing happening. There is a little bit more substance in this second episode, but still, I am worried that Kevin Feige might have gotten himself in over his head, might have gotten in over his head with this stuff so far. We have had two seasons, I'm sorry, of The Mandalorian. 2 seasons which were very high impact for the Star Wars fandom, in the Star Wars world. I think heading into The Mandalorian, no one was quite prepared, obviously, for the scope that The Mandalorian ended season 2. But even in that first season, a lot of consequence was had. Like I said, we end this 2-part episode, I'm going to call it, with a child. Much in the same way that we ended week 1 of WandaVision with a child, much in the same way that we ended week 1 of The Mandalorian with a child. But can anyone say that at the end of these 2 episodes, they feel there is as much impact on the MCU as The Mandalorian built with its first episode? Its first episode, I believe The Mandalorian's first episode was 35 to 40 minutes even. So what we're talking about here, we had a 30-ish minute playtime, I believe, on the second episode, a 20-minute playtime on the first minute episode when you subtract the credits and you subtract the intro. By the way, I like the intro to the Marvel stuff a lot better than the Lucasfilm stuff. I don't know why. I'm not really a Star Wars guy. Maybe that's it. But you're looking at essentially 10 minutes more of on-screen story time than we had with the very first episode of season 1 of The Mandalorian, and we have seemingly lower consequences. I am hoping that Kevin Feige did not think to himself that, well, the Disney Plus stuff is not the theater stuff. It will be canon, but what it can be is just a playground for our characters and people will watch. I hope that's not what happened. It is hard to surmise that might be the case simply from the 50-ish minutes of playtime that we have so far in this season. It feels like we have a lot of things. Set up. I mentioned in that first review the idea of hanging mystery. Here we have the hanging mystery of the beekeeper. We have the hanging mystery of the helicopter in the bushes. That's 2 hanging mysteries, 2 mysteries hanging over our head. We still have the hanging mystery from episode 1, who is our neighbor lady's husband. We have not met Ralph. That said, there are 2 mentions in this episode that I think are mysterious enough in themselves to provoke. There is a mention of the devil is in the details, to which the neighbor lady says that's not the only place he is. This is probably a reference to Mephisto. Mephisto is long rumored to pop up in this series. Hopefully that is the case. That is the case because what that will represent is a larger arching consequence for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which will put the whole last spiel that I went on completely out of employ. Another thing that I think was mentioned, look, Vision's British accent at times in this episode was too much for me. I was unable to understand a couple things that he said and had to rewind it and go back. Please tell me that I'm not the only one. But I think when he showed up as Illusion at the talent show, he mentioned magnetic mysteries, which would, of course, be an introduction or an Easter egg, if you will, for Magneto. Why that's important is Magneto is obviously Wanda's father, but it would also be an intro to the idea of mutants in the MCU. Now, I think what's going to happen, Wanda's going to have her children, she's going to have twins. She has Vision in her little imaginary world. She has children in her little imaginary world. I think that when the illusion is broken at the end of this series and she is brought back into the real world, Vision will be whole again. She will bring Vision back into reality from this imaginary world. I think she's also going to bring her children into the real world from this imaginary world. But I wonder if she's going to bring Magneto into the real world from this imaginary world. If we will have an introduction to Magneto in this series, and she will bring him into reality as well. If, instead of just an illusion, the place where we find ourselves in these episodes is an alternate dimension, a pocket dimension created by Wanda, inhabited by this other witch lady, what we could have is the idea of mutants sprung into the Marvel Cinematic Universe from the pocket dimension. That might happen. That might pop up in the MCU, brought into reality, and no one remembers that that had not been the case. That would be an interesting introduction to the idea of mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It would allow for backstories to be whole and true and canon and not necessitate their involvement with other MCU characters. For example, if Apocalypse had been running around in the 80s causing mayhem, that need not be remembered, that need not have occurred in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to be remembered by individuals in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because if Wanda brings this reality back into and merges with our reality from a pocket dimension, then people in this reality would remember those things despite the fact that they never happened on screen in the MCU. They were not real, and now they are. That would be an interesting way to incorporate these things. Now, I think the last thing I want to talk about is, again, I mentioned Inception on the review for the first episode of this series, and the idea of the NPCs. It seems what is being capitalized on here by the characters that are not actually real. What is being capitalized on by them is they are taking the subconscious fears of Wanda and mentioning them. Every time they realize or recognize something is missing, it's something you wouldn't really recognize that something is missing. How often is someone going to ask you how you and your husband met, for example? But Wanda knows they don't have a history together that they can mention, so someone asks. All of these little weird things that end up striking Wanda in a weird fashion, and she's taken aback by them. They're things that would be fears of hers if she knew she was being surrounded by characters that she couldn't tell her past to whom she could not tell her past. So, I'm not sure how I feel about this series so far. Obviously, it's just technically one episode, I think. One episode that has been edited in a way that it is broken down into two. But I'm not sure how I feel about it, so I hate to keep referencing The Mandalorian, but that's the only point of reference we really have on Disney+. It's also the last thing that we had. Episode 1, Season 1, The Mandalorian, I was hooked. I don't know about this, and here's the reason why that's perturbing. Because, look, I'm going to watch it every week. I'm a Marvel fan. I grew up with Marvel Comics. I grew up with the X-Men cartoon show on Fox. I'm here. The reason The Mandalorian was so successful is that it hooked in people that were not fans. I was not a Star Wars fan. It hooked me in, dragged me in, and had me from episode 1. I don't see anything in these first 2 episodes that is going to hook anyone and drag them in and keep them there going forward, even though we have these hanging mysteries that pop up. We have more hanging mysteries here, and I think that is important. I think that is going to add to the overall ambiance of the series, and I don't know that we're going to get all of the answers. I don't know that we're going to get the answer for what exactly is this helicopter toy doing in the bushes. We might. I don't know that we're going to. I don't know that we're going to get the answers for everything that pops up. I don't know if we're ever going to meet the neighbor lady's husband, for example. That adds, when you have hanging mysteries, it adds a feeling of unease. It is unsettling because we, as an audience, are every bit as alienated as are the NPCs in the series. The last thing I want to talk about is the fact that we have the same ending to this episode as we do the first episode, where it zooms out and someone is watching this on a television screen. We don't know who. We don't know from where. That is another hanging mystery that I think that one will be answered. But we also have something very strange happen at the end of the episode where they see the beekeeper individual, in that Wanda reverses time and undoes that. She just says, no, I don't want to see this. I don't want this to be in my reality. We're going to go back and it's not going to be here. So in the way that you could edit a dream, if you are an active dreamer, she goes back, she disremembers that, and she moves forward with the episode moving into color, like The Wizard of Oz. So we're living in a fantasy world with Wanda, who is being kept there by the neighbor lady, I think. And because of that, the neighbor lady is able to use Wanda in the real world. Or manipulate in some way Wanda in the real world. So I think that's what's going on. I am excited to see where episode 2 goes. Perhaps there will be a little bit more import to that episode. Perhaps there will be something more substantial. I imagine we will meet new characters. We got the boss character, Mr. Hart and Mrs. Hart, in the first episode. We got the neighborhood watch lady in this episode, as well as the neighborhood people, which the neighborhood seems to be populated just by people that Vision works with. So we're going to see what happens with that. I imagine that we will slowly accrue other people as the season goes on. But I am wondering which people of Marvel Cinematic Universe import we will meet as the season goes on. Again, I think we're looking at next week meeting Mephisto, probably. That is all that I have for this review. I'm going to review every episode this season. I also have episode reviews for all of The Mandalorian on the channel. So if you are here by chance and not design, you find yourself here as I have popped up in some recommended feed or something, and you want to stick around, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Also, likes really help me out here on the channel. So if you enjoyed this episode, help me out and hit that like button.